empowering individuals and families while contributing to the national development. This evening's lecture, held under the thought-provoking theme, A Dynamic Social Security, Anguilla Style, reminds us that our system continues to evolve responsive to the needs of our people, guided by innovation and grounded in the values that define us as Anguillians. We are especially honored this evening to have our distinguished guest lecturer, the Honorable Victor F. Banks, former Premier of Anguilla and the longest-serving member of Social Security. Minister of Social Security. Mr. Banks has played a defining role in shaping the vision, policies, and direction of this institution. His insights and experience will no doubt provide us with valuable perspectives as we look forward to the future protection in Anguilla. On behalf of the board, management, and staff of the Anguilla Social Security Board, I extend heartfelt appreciation to Mr. Banks for graciously accepting our invitation, and to all of you for being here to celebrate with us as we honor 45 years of service. Once again, welcome, and I wish you an engaging and inspiring evening. Thank you. We will now call on Mr. Jerome Roberts, a member of the board, to bless us with God's presence.
Thank you very much. Pleasant good evening to everyone. Shall we pray? O God of love and divine grace, we, your servants, come before you on this, the 45th anniversary of the Anguilla Social Security Board, to give you thanks and praise for the past and present directors, management, and staff of this noble organization. We bring before you the general public to whom we serve, and thank you for allowing us to provide the necessary benefits entrusted by your people. We remember the founding members of this noble organization and pray God's continued blessing upon those who are still with us to this day, giving thanks for the appreciation and the foresight and fortitude of those members. May this evening's proceedings bring clarity to what the mission and vision of this organization stands for. Bless, we pray, O God, our presenter, former Premier, Mr. Banks, for this year's lecture, and may you inspire him to speak truth to power to the theme under discussion, A Dynamic Journey, Social Security and Anguilla Style. May all that is said and done be to the honor and glory of God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Amen.
We will now stand for the national song. Please be seated. We will now have welcome remarks by Dr. Magdalene Lewis Webster, Director Acting.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished lecturer. It is my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to each of you present here this evening and via social media. We are particularly honored to have in our presence our chairman, Ms. Naveen Fleming, our lecturer for the evening, Mr. Victor F. Banks, members of the board and committees of the board, management and staff, as well as other officials. Today's lecture, A Dynamic Journey, Social Security Anguillan Style, we anticipate will take us through the journey of Social Security over 45 years and explore the dynamism of the Anguilla Social Security system that allowed it to be responsive to the changing needs of the people of Anguilla from the time of its introduction until today. This will be brought to us from the perspective and experiences of Mr. Banks, who has the title of the longest-serving Minister for Social Security. We look forward to hearing from him insights as to what he foresees as the next steps necessary to ensure that we remain steadfast to build a strong, sustainable fund that continues empowering generations for a better future well beyond these 45 years. Social Security is not just a basic human right as declared by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948, Article 22, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is an essential investment in modern economies and a tool for poverty reduction and inequality. The insights that will be shared here this evening by our distinguished lecturer, I'm sure will prove vital as we continue to embrace current opportunities, new technology, and diverse perspectives that will assist us in navigating through threats like climate change and pandemics. At the end of the lecture, learning from his unique perspective and experience in national leadership, we, the audience, can engage Mr. Banks in meaningful discussion and inspire fresh perspectives on how we can better build on the solid foundation, a foundation laid by pioneers like himself and the late James Ronald Webster, who introduced Social Security in Anguilla. I wish to thank the Social Security Board's Public Relations Committee, management and staff for their efforts in making this evening possible, and you, our esteemed audience. I look forward to your invaluable participation as your engagement is key to the success of this event and the Anguilla Social Security system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lois Webster, for your welcome. We will now have the introduction of the speaker by Ms. Kimberly Hazel, Acting CFO.
Good evening. It is my task to present to you the biography of Mr. Victor F. Banks. Mr. Victor F. Banks was born and raised in Anguilla on November 8, 1947. He is the first child of a family of 6. He attended the primary and secondary school in Anguilla. He graduated from the Valley Secondary School in 1963, and after working as a teacher at the same school for a period, was admitted to the University of the Virgin Islands in 1968, where he pursued studies in the social sciences with an emphasis on political science and economics. He graduated from UVI in 1972 with a Bachelor of Arts degree, summa cum laude, in social sciences. After a brief period teaching in the Virgin Islands, he moved on to the New School from Social Research graduate faculty in New York, where he earned a Master of Arts degree in Political Science in 1975. He later enrolled in the doctoral program at the same institution, completing all but the dissertation, ABD. His work experience includes teaching at various institutions in Anguilla and the U.S. Virgin Islands from 1964 to 1973. In New York, he held several managerial positions in different businesses between 1975 and 1980. In 1980, he returned to Anguilla as a political advisor to the government led by the Honorable James Ronald Webster, and in 1981 entered active politics. He was elected for 33 years, 25 of which he served consecutively. During that period, he held the position of leader of the Anguilla Democratic Party, ADP, was deputy leader of the Anguilla United Front Party, AUF, from 2000 to 2010, and later served as the leader of AUF from 2010 to 2020. He has held the position of Minister of Social Services from 1981 to 1984, Minister of Finance, Economic Development, Investment, and Commerce from 1994 to 2005. From 2005 to Minister of Finance, Economic Development, Investment, Commerce, and Tourism Development from 2015 to 2020. During his tenure as Minister of Finance, he has been a member of the Monetary Council of Eastern Caribbean Central Bank for over 20 years and served as the chairman of Monetary Council on 4 occasions. He also served as the governor on the Board of Governors of Caribbean Development Bank on several occasions. He was elected representative for Valley North from 1981 to 1984 and for Valley South from 1985 to 2010, and again 2015 to 2020. He has been the president/owner of Banks Professional Services Limited, a company specializing in management and consultancy since 1985. He has also served as director for several trust companies and other boards. Additionally, he has held leadership roles in various business and community organizations. Please help me welcome Mr. Banks to the lectern.
It seemed like a long life. And I can't say I'm still a young man. But thank you all very much for gracing me with your presence here this evening. I was encouraged to do this lecture very cleverly, and I decided, after some persuasion, to do so. When I was asked to present the annual Social Security Week lecture marking the 45th anniversary of the Anguilla Social Security Board, my first response to Ms. Brown was, "You know I'm retired, right? And I'm not seeking any work either." She was very gracious in her response and asked me to take a few days to think about it. After hanging up, and most likely smitten by her charming manner in which she extended the invitation, I responded just a few moments later by email, "Dear Mrs. Brown, thank you and other officials of the Social Security Board for the privilege of being considered to present a lecture on this memorable occasion. I accept your invitation and remain flattered that persons have decided that I may have something interesting to say. I hope that that confidence will prove well-founded." So here I am. I did not apply for this job, but I responded to a flattering invitation, and now I beg of you, who have thought it worthwhile to be here to attend, to allow me a reasonable portion of your patience and tolerance to listen to what I intend to be a brief presentation on the last 40 years since the passage of the Anguilla Social Security Act. I have chosen elements of that journey that I deem worthy of reflection. Remember, I said brief. Having accepted the task, I rationalized that as the longest-serving minister with responsibility for Social Security, 20 years to be exact, I should be able to find something interesting along that journey to comment on, especially since previous to my service as minister, I was also a part of that team of warriors who assisted the father of the nation in the trenches to sell the concept of social justice and social solidarity to the people of Anguilla over various fora, including radio programs, meetings, and the like. Of notable mention in the trenches were Mr. Colville Petty and Mr. Marcel Foy. It was a period during which many persons were uncertain of the motives of the late Honorable James Ronald Webster as he passionately pursued his vision to establish a social security system in Anguilla. So yes, it is quite possible that I may have something interesting to say. In fact, I may have too much to say. Therefore, I will be most grateful again if you would be generous with your attention. I've taken some time to do some research for this conversation, given the fact that even though 45 years seem to have passed quickly, we also quickly forget many aspects of the journey and the process that brought us here, as well as the successes we have achieved and the challenges we have overcome. By reflecting on over 40 years of Social Security, we may come to the realization that this is actually spanning 1.5 generations of Anguillians. But when we further take into account the fact that the contributions begin at the age of 15, it adds up to 2 generations. This is significant because it means that most Anguillians under the age of 60 met a social security system in place in Anguilla, so as a consequence, may take it for granted. So to such persons, a conversation about the elements of that journey may be interesting, useful, and perhaps even instructive. I've been using the word conversation in reference to my presentation because I believe that the term lecture may conjure up the image of a professional delivery or even an academic discourse. In fact, in deciding on my approach to this task, I shudder to believe that anyone would even consider my presentation an authoritative work on the subject of Social Security in Anguilla. On the contrary, I would hope that what I have to say will encourage some of you to recognize the significance of the vision, whence we have come, where we are headed, and what it will take us to continue on that journey. Terms like social security, social solidarity, social justice, social protection will inevitably be a part of this conversation and used interchangeably at times, but always meaning how and what we can do to make the goals of human dignity available to our people as an entitlement. I struggled for some time to come up with a fitting title for my presentation. I was fully aware that the theme for this week is 45 years of empowering generations for a better future. However, after paying due obedience to the intent of that theme, my brainstorming resulted in enough titles sufficient to fill my waste paper basket. I eventually settled on, and I quote, "A Dynamic Journey, Social Security, Anguilla Style." It would have been cliché to have chosen one of the titles that I discarded, namely, Social Security, a Journey, Not a Destination. This paraphrases a well-known quotation attributed to that great 19th century American writer and philosopher, Ralph Waldo Emerson, when he said, "Life is a journey, not a destination." But while that title would capture the essence of most Social Security systems, it would not have done justice to the path of our Anguilla Social Security system. It would not have captured the vision and the determination of the late John James Ronald Webster to establish a Social Security system in Anguilla against all odds and factual realities. In the beginning was the idea. The Social Security system in Anguilla did not come as a response to an edict from a British governor or the Foreign Commonwealth Office. It was not enacted by an order in council from the late Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. It was not the outcome of any country policy plan from the British Development Division Barbados. It came from an Anguillan leader supported by a mandate of his people in a general election where his party won 6 out of the 7 elected seats in the House of Assembly. Of note as well is the fact that even with this overwhelming mandate, 2 of Mr. Webster's ministers expressed opposition to the passage of the bill in Parliament. Interestingly enough, in an election 6 months later, both of these ministers lost their seats. In further testimony to the determination of Mr. Webster is the fact that he did not receive any technical support from the British government for this important venture. To launch the system, he actually went to the country against which he had led a revolution 13 years earlier, and from which Anguilla had just a year earlier officially separated. And therefore, we must be thankful to Mr. Robert Manning, the director of the system in St. Kitts Nevis, and he deserves our gratitude for his generous support and expertise in this undertaking, including training staff here in Anguilla. The environment in which Mr. Webster sought to introduce Social Security was challenged by vocal opposition from the public service as well as some employers. This took the form of several acts of civil disobedience, marches, strikes, petitions, and the like. I must also mention the unfortunate nomenclature used with Social Security systems at that time, namely scheme, that is to say, Social Security scheme. It was relatively easy for detractors and naysayers to support or interpret scheme to mean scam, and from that premise, extrapolate that there was a suspicious motive to this proposal. But Mr. Webster was not deterred from his resolve to establish his vision. It was obvious that he was concerned about the possibility of sabotage from the public service, and so he introduced a separate agency to administer the system. And perhaps to avoid any form of inbreeding, he appointed a veritable schoolboy, Timothy Hodge, as the administrative officer. That same administrative officer, now Dr. Timothy Hodge, became the second director of Social Security in Anguilla. And Dr. Hodge, having since retired, still remains the last official holder of that post 39 years later. That is, of course, a curious situation, which in the context of this important institution demands urgent fixing. To further illustrate the lack of British support was the fact that the board's administrative office had to appeal to the Peace Corps, an American volunteer service agency, to seek a suitable volunteer with experience in social security systems to assist. That person arrived, but did not have any of those specific skills. However, by the grace of God, he had skills in accounting and statistics, which proved useful to the task of building the integrity and accountability of the fund. And while I want to be extremely cautious in mentioning too many names in this presentation, it deserves the risk to thank Craig Snively, the Peace Corps volunteer, for his dedicated and stellar contributions to the Social Security system's development in those formative years. Continuing to describe the environment in which Mr. Webster took the bold decision to establish our system, I must mention that based on the 1984 census, Anguilla had a population of 6,987 persons, 3,428 males and 3,559 females. Given these realities, it could have been a reasonable conclusion that with such small numbers, further exacerbated by low employment and a weak economy, a social security system would face real challenges to achieve sustainability. I'm sure that though Mr. Webster's passion may have ignored or discounted the significance of those realities, he must have been aware, however, that failure would have been devastating for his people as well as for his legacy. Failure is not an option when establishing any social security system. Conscious of that fact, the Anguilla social security system had to trust in a future characterized by strong, positive social economic growth on our island. Obviously, the concept of social solidarity had to be central to the campaign in support of Webster's vision. And during that campaign, social solidarity was invoked by using the biblical question, "Am I my brother's keeper?" The definition of the concept of solidarity from the book of Google is, and I quote, "a sense of unity and shared purpose that holds a society together based on shared values, beliefs, and a feeling of interdependence," unquote. But perhaps for many Anguillians, it may have come down to the stark realization that once the train left the station, all passengers had to be engaged in the process. As this simple reality grew, so did the fund, and as benefits became tangible, so did many of the naysayers become believers. There is a saying which bears much truth: success has many fathers. I would add to that, many mothers as well, because ironically, our mother country, that was previously lukewarm and reluctant in providing technical support, became aggressively interested in offering advice and assistance in managing and investing the fund, which by that time had surpassed their earlier expectations. To take Cuban President Fidel Castro, the late Cuban President Fidel Castro, in his defense of his revolutionary actions against the regime of Fulgencio Batista in his country, said, "History will absolve me." History has indeed absolved the late Honorable James Ronald Webster for whatever elements of naivety, blind passion, overzealousness, disregard or ignorance of the facts, and even bullying, which may have characterized the approach in the formative years of the Anguilla Social Security system. Setting the stage. But an idea or vision cannot transform itself into the realization of its purpose and goals without a sound plan for navigating the various situations that may arise. There must be a clear framework that outlines the hierarchy of its management and administration, a set of agreed measures to finance its goals and get it started, terms that set out and govern the relationship between the various actors, a mutually agreed process for the settlement of disputes, and a pathway to making it a legal entity. Obviously, the Social Security Act, signed into law on November 4, 1980, was that point of departure for achieving the goals and purposes of that great idea. I'm not a lawyer, and assume that many of you listening are not either. However, we all have a pretty good idea that it was the Social Security Act that had to give the authority to the board to manage the funds and ensure the efficient and equitable delivery of the services promised to the beneficiaries. Mr. Tom Morgan, an American investment manager and a friend of our Social Security system and a friend of Anguilla, wrote in his article in the 25th anniversary booklet of the Anguilla Social Security Board one of the clearest definitions I have ever heard of what Social Security is supposed to be. His article was entitled, and I quote, "A Social Security System of Distinction." Quite an honor. And I quote his definition. Basically, it's the people's money. People allow money to be taken from their paychecks. They allowed it to be deposited in a pool. The pool is invested to grow larger. Social Security is drawn from that pool to pay benefits to those in need and to pay benefits to those who retire from work. The pool should grow. It should be wisely invested. It is also important that experts from elsewhere check in on it regularly. These experts need to calculate whether there is enough money in the pool for Social Security to pay out the money it has promised the people. They check whether the investments are growing rapidly enough to meet its obligations. They calculate whether enough money is going into the pool each year to pay the benefits promised, and those experts report to the Social Security Board, and if they find shortcomings, the board must make changes, unquote. Since I really cannot improve on Mr. Morgan's definition, I feel justified in repeating it here. I could actually go home now. But I have dubbed Mr. Morgan the Great Explainer because in such simple language, he has outlined every single aspect of the Anguilla Social Security system. But most of all, we can now see clearly why it was necessary for the Social Security Act to be first signed into law, as well as the underlying importance of embracing social solidarity as a moral imperative. These are the two important elements of the environment that enables the success of a Social Security system. Contributors must first accept that it is established legally with relevant provisions for integrity and accountability. And secondly, they must feel a sense of unity with the community to persuade them to be compliant. In other words, they must feel that by paying their fair share, they will be making the community a better place and more secure place for they, themselves, as well as others in the community. The Anguilla Social Security Act is a dynamic piece of legislation befitting this dynamic journey. Over the 45 years of its existence, there have been many amendments, all of which have led to an improvement in the delivery of support services for the community. And I'll name a few. In 1986, began the payment of sickness benefits, invalidity and survivor's pension, and funeral grants, even if the injury or death is job-related. In 1986, a new branch of the fund within the system was created for the purpose of funding social projects as the board selects, with the prior approval of the minister, known as the Social Development Fund. 3.5% of contribution income is allocated each year, and donations made to assist various educational, sporting, health, and cultural activities in Anguilla. In 1993, Social Security finally convinced government to reverse its decision to exclude the coverage of certain government workers, and therefore, all government employees from that time must contribute. In 2002, a non-contributory old age pension assistance program was introduced. In 2003, the inclusion of the self-employed. And continuing into the present, at various junctures, various grants and allowances have been added, such as disability grant, survivor's grant, maternity allowance, paternity allowance, maternity grant, and so on. Of separate mention is the wage ceiling limits and where it has moved from 1982 when it first began. From 1982 to 1993, the ceiling limit was EC $2,000. From 1993 to 1996, it was $3,000. From 1997 to 1998, $4,000. From 1999 to 2006, $5,000. It was $2,000. In 2007, it was $6,000. And from 2008 to the present, the ceiling amount is $7,000. $7,000 each month. It's important to know that the Anguilla Social Security Act places all the authority for the management and governing of the Social Security squarely under the purview of the minister. There is only one section, namely Part 1, Section 6.1, where it reads, and I quote, "The governor shall appoint a fit and proper person to be the chief administrative officer of the board." That, of course, is the director. However, that same section goes on to qualify itself by the next section, which reads, "on such terms as the governor in council may determine." There are two operative phrases here. They are the governor shall and the governor in council. The governor in council means the executive council, where elected members are the ones who make the decisions. So the governor's actions in this case must be in keeping with terms and conditions determined and decided by elected members. The members of the board, for the most part, except in the case of the director, who is on the board by virtue of his position, his or her position, are appointed and serve mainly at the direction of the minister responsible for Social Security. The board is a tripartite body, which includes two government representatives who are not members of the House of Assembly, two representatives of employees, and two representatives of employers. Therefore, as was the vision of the founding father, it is clear that the authority for Social Security is in the hands of the people. However, with power also resides responsibility, and I would add to that integrity and accountability as well. The Act provides for this in Part 1, Sections 15 and 16, where it requires the accounts and audit be presented to the Minister and House of Assembly on an annual basis and an actuarial advice review every 3 years. These are the persons of whom Mr. Morgan spoke in his definition of Social Security as experts from elsewhere. There is another section that I will lift from the provisions of the Act because it will be important in another part of my conversation, namely Part 1, Section 14, subsection 1 and 2. And it reads, any temporary insufficiency in the assets of the fund to meet the liabilities of the fund shall be advanced out of the consolidated fund, and that is the consolidated fund of the government of Anguilla. And the second subsection reads, subject to this Act, any sums advanced under subsection 1 shall be repaid to the consolidated fund as soon as may be practicable. So in essence, the government of Anguilla has the responsibility to make good on shortfalls of the Social Security Fund. Obviously, that responsibility requires a constant flow of information between the board and the government, really the minister, which must include approvals and oversight on an ongoing and regular basis as detailed in the Act. The importance of this provision to the dynamic journey of a Social Security system will be examined later in the conversation. A widely quoted American writer, she was actually a nun, Joan Chittister, wrote, and I quote, "The purpose of leadership is not to make the present bearable. The purpose of leadership is to make the future possible." It is worthy of mention that successive governments, since the establishment of Social Security, have embraced it and have not intervened in its operations in a manner that has been characterized by a number of other jurisdictions in our hemisphere. In other words, over the years, they have understood that Social Security must be a perpetual system. In 1992, benefits paid out by the system as early as that year were $11,000. 10 years later, in 1992, it grew to over $405,000. In terms of the benefits payments the system is making today, that may seem minuscule, but it was an element of social protection that did not exist before 1982, and as a consequence, led to a steady rise in trust and confidence in the vision. In those early days, the system as constituted was not allowed to invest outside of Anguilla, and as a consequence, it was incentivized to play a significant role in financing the development process in Anguilla, to the extent that it was disbursing loans to the Anguilla Development Board to unlend to qualified startup businesses, fishing, first-time home construction, and the like, other ventures. So the earlier vision for Social Security gained momentum and became a tangible manifestation of the system in the lives of its contributors. And as the system continues to be relevant in both individual and community-wide social needs, the dynamics of the journey must focus its attention on sustainability. Teachable experiences along the journey. Having set the stage by making strategic and progressive changes to the system, inevitably, we can expect to encounter challenges along the journey which we did not anticipate. However, given the dynamic nature of Social Security, the Social Security Act, those challenges have not metastasized into obstacles, but rather became opportunities that have highlighted the value of the system. The response to overcoming these challenges has also afforded us teachable moments on how to improve the resilience of the system to deal with man-made disasters, natural disasters, and other exogenous shocks. It is fair to suggest that such challenges could have become existential threats to the sustainability of Social Security were it not for the number of strategic interventions based on the resource potential of the fund between 2015 and 2020. There were at least 3 such challenges to our system, and by extension, our island, that have tested the capacity of the relationship between the board and government to advance social protection and social justice for our people. I am referring to the banking crisis, Hurricane Irma, and the COVID pandemic. These are by far the 3 largest rescue projects in the life journey of the system. Ironically, all 3 of these events took place when I was both Minister responsible for Social Security and leader of the government business premier. That is to say, during my watch. I will deal with Hurricane Irma and the COVID pandemic first, and together for obvious reasons, and follow up with the banking crisis. But let me mention a statement made by Mr. Derek Osborne, an actuary born in Montserrat, when he wrote in a study on Social Security in the CARICOM, and I quote, "Perhaps the most influential but least visible contributor to the state of Social Security in the region is political intervention, both good and bad. In many respects, governments have hurt their schemes by being too involved with the administration and investment matters. On the other hand, many have failed to make timely and appropriate increases to the wage ceilings and pensions in payment, and to respond to recommendations made in successive actuarial reviews." In other words, there are times when interventions by governments can be damaging, but lack of intervention at appropriate times can likewise be detrimental. In the end, it all comes down to the effective relationship between the partners in the delivery of social protection, namely the Social Security scheme, the board, and the government. I've established this context so that we can think about where we are, where our Social Security system stands along this continuum between good and bad intervention, but also to further demonstrate how the vision for the establishment of the system against all odds was indeed timely to assist our people in critical times and situations. In the aftermath of Hurricane Irma, and during the COVID pandemic, our labor market was decimated in the case of Hurricane Irma, based on the destruction mainly of the tourism plant. It is estimated that over 2,000 persons in our workforce in the aftermath of Hurricane Irma were immediately without full employment. At that juncture, the Social Security Act did not have a specific provision for unemployment insurance coverage. Therefore, an amendment had to be made to subsection 24(1) of Part 3 of the Act to insert in that subsection the following clause, which provides coverage for which occurs due to special and abnormal circumstances, unemployment assistance benefit in the form of payments to an insured person who is unemployed or underemployed. This benefit was to be of a temporary nature and at an amount and for a time period equitably determined by the partners, that being Social Security Board and the government of Anguilla. The amendment came into force in December of 2017, almost 2 months into the aftermath of Hurricane Irma. Eligibility for the assistance was determined based on terms and conditions in collaboration with the employers in the private sector, statutory corporations, and the government agencies. On the other hand, when the COVID pandemic came around, the wheel was already invented. However, the economic and social issues associated with the pandemic lingered around considerably longer, whereas the labor market in the aftermath of Irma, measured by the cost of Social Security, the Social Security Fund, the effects to the Social Security Fund, was $1,791,000 EC, whereas the cost from COVID was more than 3 times as much, a total of 5 million. Did I say 1,000 or 1 million? $1,791,000. For COVID, it was 3 times as much, a total of $5,494,000. When one takes into account that in the circumstances of both these disasters, income from contributions would have been significantly decreased, it is clear that the growth of the reserves would have been severely and similarly impaired. Nevertheless, I believe that unaffected persons who still had jobs and were still paying their contributions never complained or questioned this decision out of any consideration that such income replacement benefits could impact the future sustainability of the fund. They didn't complain. In essence, they would have consciously or unwittingly bought into the concept of social solidarity, and that's a good thing. So once again, the experience during this dynamic journey would have awoken us to the need to make this response a more prominent aspect of a social justice policy. And the impacted workers could become the ideal campaigners to effect this change. But most of all, in the wider analysis, we must realize that in intervening in both situations after Hurricane Irma and the COVID pandemic, Social Security was fulfilling that important role of protecting its contributors against these shocks to our economy. And in doing so, it stabilized the macroeconomic situation, environment, whatever you want to call it, thus bridging the gap created by the lack of spending in the various sectors of the community. We strongly believe that based on its early vision, the Social Security system has a duty of care to protect and secure the well-being of its contributors and their families during such challenging times. In the earlier part of my presentation, my conversation, I indicated that I would be coming back to Part 1, Section 14 of the Act, where it speaks to temporary insufficiency of assets. The reasonable interpretation of this provision is that the government is ultimately responsible for any shortcomings in the capacity of the Social Security Fund to meet its obligations. In subsection 2 of the same provision, it further states, any sums advanced under Section 1, subsection 1, shall be repaid to the consolidated fund as soon as may be practicable. Imagine going into a bank to borrow money, and the loan officer says to you, no problem, you can pay it back as soon as may be practicably possible. No collateral, no late fees, no payment schedule, and most of all, no interest. you could only possibly, and I repeat, possibly, get such a concession on a loan from your parents. I therefore deduce that from this provision, that the government is more than just a partner, but indeed a major stakeholder, even a parent in that role, and seems obliged to be a guardian of what the many contributors put into that pool that Tom Morgan talks about. And one of the ways government does that is by building a strong economy and developing policies that promote stable communities. But this clause seems to affirm a more direct responsibility in challenging times. A statement came across my desk during my research, an ILO publication, and it suggests, and I quote, "The best way to guarantee people's economic and social rights is undoubtedly to provide them with decent work." This principle supports the importance of government policies as they relate to the Social Security's objectives. But the clause in Section 14, subsection 2, goes much further, the one I quoted earlier. So what does all this have to do with Social Security, the banking crisis, and ultimately the banking resolution? Well, if you had listened to the various social media pundits and some talk show hosts in Angola 9 years ago, you would have come away with the belief that the government raided the Social Security Fund to save the banks. This could be construed to mean that the government was not operating in the spirit of the act or in the spirit of the vision to support Social Security. On the contrary, as the largest depositor in the indigenous banks, the fund was in grave danger. In fact, as in the case of all depositors, there was a real chance that any other resolution, and I stand by that, would have meant cents on the dollar. That is, for every dollar you have in the bank, you could receive a much smaller percentage of the amount. You may receive a smaller percentage of the amount. It could have been possible that the Social Security Fund deposits at that time over $200 million, I think it was 214 to be exact, in the indigenous banks would have lost its value, and the sustainability of the fund would have been in dire straits. The important difference in the nature of the fund, however, was the fact that those funds were not needed immediately to meet its obligations to its contributors until many years into the future, whereas you or I would have wanted our money on short notice, if not sooner. The Social Security Fund, on the other hand, is a reserve fund for future generations, and therefore could be loosely categorized as what is often referred to as patient capital. But to get to the future, one must journey through the present. In these circumstances, it was mutually beneficial for both Social Security and the government of Anguilla to stabilize the banking sector and the economy so that the future of the fund and its contributors could be preserved. So what did government do? They floated a 25-year bond at 3% interest to secure the Social Security Fund for future generations and its beneficiaries. Given the present success of the bank and the Anguillan economy, that bond could most likely be paid off ahead of time, or can be paid off ahead of time. So we don't always have to dwell in the present. We also have to look to the future with confidence, with hope, with prayers, with all those kinds of things. So the existence of the Social Security Fund created a win-win situation for all involved. It allowed for the protection of local customer deposits as well as their future and short-term interests in the fund. Even though I call the above rescue projects, there are others which show the response of the partners to catastrophic events of various kinds. But there are a number of other projects in which the board leveraged its funds so as to support economic, social, and cultural issues, which I would not want us to forget or take for granted. It is a role which the fund is constrained to play because of its responsibility to its contributors and to the community. I will mention a few, but the list is not exhaustive. Here goes. The purchase of shares in a number of Anguillan public companies, NBA, NICA, Anglec, etc. Facilitating the purchase of property at Cinnamon Reef to secure it for Anguillians and Anguilla. Purchase of funds, lands to develop the strip, which is still something which we need to really improve and get it going. Finance consultancies for the diversification of the economy, like the Yachting Marina Project, a consultancy, national health insurance, gaming, etc. Sponsorship of cultural events and festivals, the Jazz Festival, Summer Festival, boat racing, and so forth. There was a street lighting project with sidewalks and Coronation Avenue, which everybody forgets. Sporting sponsorships, cricket, tennis, volleyball, and the like. The establishment of the Social Development Fund, which is, in my estimation, a catch-all to cover projects within the board's social mandate. There are many more interventions, large and small, which have impacted the lives of contributors and their families. And it's refreshing to hear from our Honorable Premier Cora Richardson Hodge in her address on Monday when she said, "As your government, we remain committed to working hand in hand with the Social Security Board to ensure that this institution remains strong, sustainable, and responsive to the evolving needs of the people." Question, are we there yet? Are we there yet is a question we often associate with youthful inexperience and exuberance. Many of you may remember that old television ad with a family on a road trip, most likely going to an amusement park or the zoo. And every 5 minutes, the youngster would ask the question, are we there yet? As far as this dynamic journey is concerned, this is where those experts from elsewhere come into the picture. These experts that Tom Morgan referred to are called actuaries. And because Social Security is a journey rather than a destination, their job is to make sure that we are fully equipped to continue the journey. The Social Security Act requires that the board conducts a review every 3 years. All the amendments and improvements to the benefits of the contributors or non-contributors, as the case may be, are informed by the actuarial recommendations and analysis, as well as any adjustments to the level of contributions and rate ceilings. I pause to make mention of the longest-serving actuary and a man who I believe was truly committed to the Anguilla Social Security Board and to delivering sound and unbiased actuarial advice to Anguilla. I speak of a gentleman by the name of Mr. Hernando Perez Montas. The last actuarial review was prepared from information up to December 31st, 2023, already 2 years old. Therefore, the next one is due as of December 31st, 2026, next year. But before I cause any panic to contributors here or those listening, let me say that based on this report, the system is not in crisis. But as my former colleague, Chief Minister, the Honorable Osmond Fleming, often advised, we got to look for black sheep before dark. It is projected, however, that all things being equal, total expenditure will exceed contributions between 2028 and 2032. And there's a further projection that if no reforms are made, the reserves will be depleted between 2040 and 2042. As foreboding as this may sound, it is not a death sentence. Actual reviews cannot capture everything, but their warnings must be taken seriously. Should the future bring positive turnarounds in our socio-economic system, the projection would also change. For example, these projections are an improvement over those made in the 12th actuarial review some years ago. There should be no comfort in relation to this example, but we must seek to make adjustments as recommended, at least until the last review, until the next review, because herein lies the importance of those experts from elsewhere, the actuaries. But most importantly, herein lies the necessity for regular reviews. As usual, a number of recommendations have been made in the actuarial review to ensure the longer-term sustainability of the board, of the fund. For example, the contribution rate adjustments began since last year and will continue until they reach the recommended level of 6% for employer and employee by 2027. Another important concern is the need to reduce administrative costs. There are a number of efficiencies that can assist in that process, which include new technologies and management systems. And of course, in a small population, economies of scale negatively affects the ratio between the quantum of collections and the cost to administer them. However, strategic adjustments to this situation must be made. And having said that, an increase in job creation in the overall economy can definitely affect or decrease that ratio as well. The recommendations, for the most part, are very reasonable and create a good balance between the need for sustainability and improvement to the quality of protection to the contributors. Many of them are geared towards more efficiency in management, more relevant regulations, enhancing compliance, introducing permanent unemployment benefits, raising the wage ceiling level, improving transparency by engaging stakeholders in both formal and informal settings, and updating the investment policy. I will not venture to comment on the impact of artificial intelligence on our journey in this space, despite the fact that we cannot escape the tentacles in whatever we do and wherever we go. However, at this juncture, in my retirement, I am in a need-to-know relationship with technology. In that context, it is my admonition that the board seriously addresses how best it can assist its contributors and their families through these inevitable changing scenes of life. The actuarial review is timely. The projects, as I mentioned, are based on all things being equal, on all things, the projections, as I mentioned, are based on all things being equal. So gloom or sunshine is dependent on growth in the number of contributors, which is also a factor of the overall economy. In this context, the board and government must keep their relationship and the exchange of information in good repair. I must say that as long as I have been aware, that relationship has over the years redounded to the benefit of the system. Long may it continue. For me, it would be almost impossible to comment on this journey without singling out one person who may not rise to the heights associated with the indisputable father of Social Security, the late James Ronald Webster. However, he was unquestionably a force behind the throne. I'm going to dub him the father of the Social Development Fund because it was definitely his brainchild. Of course, I'm talking about Mr. Fabian Marcel Foy. I'll bring him up at this point as I proceed to quote a very poignant statement he wrote in the 25th anniversary booklet 18 years ago, and which remains even more relevant at this time as I try to respond to the question, are we there yet? And the statement reads, a socialization vacuum has developed among youth today. That vacuum needs to be urgently removed, especially among young males. Unless the vacuum is removed in a conscious and planned way by institutions committed to addressing and reversing the negative trends among Anguilla's youth, the good economic times now enjoyed could quickly evaporate because of failure to effectively address the social development and behavioral challenges, especially among young people, unquote. I repeat, this was written 18 years ago. I believe Social Security is one of those institutions mentioned. And so, if we have not been making any real progress in addressing this, even as a singular issue, as far as the dynamic journey is concerned, I respectfully submit that we are not there yet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mr. Banks, for that insightful and inspiring presentation. Your reflections this evening have truly captured the essence of our lecture theme, a dynamic social security Anguilla style. You have reminded us of how far we've come as a nation and as an institution, and of the dedication, foresight, and leadership that have helped shape our social security system in what it is today. As the longest-serving Minister of Social Security, your perspective brings great depth to our celebration of 45 years, inspiring generations for a better future. Your words challenge us to continue building on that foundation, to remain dynamic, people-centered, and focused on ensuring that Social Security continues to meet the evolving needs of Anguilla and its people. On behalf of the board, management, and staff of the Anguilla Social Security Board, I extend a heartfelt appreciation to you, Mr. Banks, for sharing your time, wisdom, and vision with us this evening. Let us please join once again in expressing our sincere thanks and appreciation to Mr. Banks. Okay, the floor is now open for questions and discussion.
Thank you. You had to get up.
Nobody else was getting up, so I couldn't let you go so easily. I want to thank you, Mr. Banks, for your lecture about this journey, which indeed it has been a journey. I just want to say a couple of things and start by perhaps adjusting the beginning of the journey. You spoke about the act being passed in November 1980. Let us remember that Anguilla was formally separated from St. Kitts Nevis on the 19th of December, 1980. That is the following month. The following month, the month following that, January 1981, is when the Social Security Board was established, and the first employee, the Social Security Board was established, and the formal separation celebrations took place. Remember, we're talking about January 1981. At those celebrations, Dr. Kennedy Simmons, now Sir Kennedy, stood here on Webster's Park during those separation celebrations. And I believe, and I can ask Sir Kennedy, and I will, whether those conversations about that attachment in St. Kitts took place at that time. Remember, it is only a couple of weeks after. And on the 1st of February, the first Social Security employee, the first person was employed at the Social Security office, that was myself. And that weekend, I set off to St. Kitts on that attachment that you spoke of under Bob Manning. So we must also thank the administration of the government, the new government of St. Kitts Nevis, the PAM government at the time, PAM NRP government at the time, because it's unlikely that that would have taken place under the previous Labor administration. So let us remember that as well. Subsequently, the Social Security system, as you rightly said, without any actuarial review, without any feasibility study, without any UNDP consultancy, as was the case, or ILO, as was the case with every other social security system in the Caribbean, was set into being with those attachments, training, and all the preliminary work. And the social security system started on the 1st of January, 1982. That is less than 11 months after. So let us really consider the speed in which this happened, and consider whether or not anything like that can happen today or would happen today. I just also want to say that, for the record, that you spoke of the government having to come in, if necessary, and the Social Security Board having to pay them forthwith, as soon as is possible. I also want to, for the record, state for the record, that the Social Security Fund and all of those expenses up until it began to collect its own contributions had transferred to it from another department in government, or department of government, 28,000 EC dollars. 28,000 EC dollars, that's what the Social Security Board spent in its first year, and those funds were returned to the government in January of the following month when Social Security began to collect contributions, so that there was no feasibility study, none of these things, and neither any grant given from the government to Social Security. Just wanted to see that for the record, because that is, I think, amazing. One other thing that I would want to mention, two other things. Just one other thing is that the Social Security Board in Anguilla has been a leader in Caribbean Social Security, a leader. And a leader, of course, has followers. And it has led the Social Security Development Fund, for example, has been followed in other Caribbean systems. Our computerization here has been followed in other Social Security systems. And in fact, the Anguilla Social Security System, its director for many years served as the chairperson of the subcommittee of the Inter-American Conference on Social Security Systems, covering the entire hemisphere. America, Canada, Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, Anguilla headed that group for many years. Just to say that how much respect the Social Security system had garnered over those years. And finally, you mentioned Mr. Tom Morgan, and I would like to tonight, and I know that you would as well, because he was all our friend, as you said. His wife, Honor McReynolds, passed recently, and I've been in touch with Mr. Tom Morgan, and he's, of course, very deeply saddened by her loss. Just want us to remember her and her contributions to Social Security in Anguilla, their contributions, and remember him as well tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hodge. I wasn't intending to be a historian because we could have been here all night. But I thank you for taking that opportunity to add to the comments that I made in connection with that part of the history. And I made it my business not to mention too many names. And the names that I mentioned were the names of persons who I think were very significant in that process. As far as the issues related to the success of the Social Security internationally, regionally, and the role it has played in the region, that's important. That's important for persons within the community and the board to have a sense of pride in. But it is very important right now to focus on whether or not we are going to be sustainable in the future, because the actual review has pointed out that we cannot boast that the fund is sustainable. That is always there's a caveat always to that, because the fact that the information that they're working with is current economic and socioeconomic data. And Angola is well known for being able to surprise, for lack of a better word, I'm not thinking fast enough, whatever the pundits, whether the analysts have said about our capabilities in so many different areas. We have a small population, and therefore it's important for us to focus on what is necessary to grow the fund, in addition to development of the economy. It also requires that we grow our population. That could come from immigration and all those other important issues. We must be very, very careful when we talk about immigration issues, that we don't recognize that we have to continue to build our internal markets to make Angola a success. We cannot continue in the future with a population of 15,000 and expect that all the things that we are doing will be able to maintain, whether there's the internal markets, to make them sustainable. So these are issues that we all have got to be thinking about. And the fact that in 1982 we had a population of less than 7,000, we started Social Security, and we are lucky that there was a period when there was no demand, very normal, no demand on the fund to pay benefits. But as we go forward, it will be recognized that from 1982 to the present, we have probably just a little over doubled our population, but it needs more. In terms of the actual review, we need a lot more in terms of a population. We're not making producing sufficient young people to replace or cover the old, the aged in our population. People are living longer, right? So therefore, we have to provide benefits for them longer. So we have to get people, population here to replace those benefits. Right now, the benefits per person is somewhere in the region of 3.9 persons to support the population, to support each pensioner. And that has continued to decrease from 2003, yeah, considerably. So we got to look at that carefully. We can't look away from the issue that the actuaries are saying that the fund is not sustainable at present, in the present situation, all things being equal. So changes have got to happen. Not only changes in the policies of the board, not only changes in the nature of the benefits, but changes in population, in the economy, in efficiencies, and a whole range of things that have to happen. So it is important to talk about history, and it's exciting, and it brings back the memory to people who are part of the scheme, 60 years old, and you don't know a lot about what happened to cause Social Security to be a reality in Angola today. So that's important. At the end of the day, we have to look to the future and be sure that we are able to sustain this fund. And that is all. That's my response to what you have said, and I appreciate the fact that You have spoken to the issue of the history, and I think at some point you need to write a book because you have a younger mind. You have a younger mind about issues that took place. I can remember sitting in the trenches on Radio Anguilla and at public meetings when people were attacking you left, right, and center and saying that Mr. Webster is only trying to tax the people and talking about Social Security and all the way back. But at the end of the day, it happened. People have come on board. We have got to realize that for it to be successful, we have got to pay our own way. The unemployed must register and must be heavily involved in securing this fund. Not only the workers, because you remember that the employees, all the employees, at this time, if the self-employed don't come on board, they will take in the burden of the community, including some of the self-employed, because some of the self-employed who are not contributing might have to get age pensions or something. So it's a holistic approach to this that we have got to take on board. Yeah. So while it is glamorous to talk about how we came and how we got here, beyond the vision of the James Ronald Webster, there's got to be the embracing of Social Security as an institution for securing the level of human dignity for the people of Anguilla as a right, as an entitlement. And we have got to continue to move towards that. So that's what I think is important. Sorry for being so lengthy.
Good evening. Sorry I missed the early part of your conversation. I like that you use the word conversation, because I think that's what we should attempt to do. I just want to say that since the vision back in 1980, and people like yourself, Tim, myself, and so on, who we like to say were in the trenches, I don't think that we have spent enough time thinking about the dynamics of the institution from a strategic policy standpoint, right? Mr. Webster couldn't set up Social Security. That was not his skill area. His skill area was to think about it, to vision it. And I'll tell you this, we all talk about him and Social Security. He's also the father of the Labor Department. Those are the two things in the 1980 elections that he pushed. Get into office, Social Security, we're going to create a Labor Department so that the government has an entity that focuses on labor issues. And there again, I don't know if we have done enough in terms of thinking about labor policy and the whole situation affecting working people. And I use working people very broad, everybody who works and so on. So my main comment I want to share is this lecture, and I think Social Security also does something around Anguilla Day. What, the Jihad Memorial Lecture, is it, Tim? Right. That should be taken as an indication, these things should be taken as an indication that we do need to spend a little more time thinking about the entity. If it's not sustainable, how do we make it sustainable? In a situation where population has actually fallen back. The last census showed that population is a bit less than it was 2011 or whenever it was, right? And that's one of the impacts of the Great Recession. People moved away, right? And in general, I want to suggest that apart from Social Security and thinking about it, in Anguilla, we need to create entities that focus on a lot more on deep thinking about Social Security, about development, about population, and all of those things. It's easy for us to say we need more population. The challenge is, what is a feasible approach to more population? Because there's a multiplicity of factors you got to deal with, right? And similarly, to make Social Security sustainable, we need to think about it. So perhaps the folks who are responsible for Social Security in terms of board and minister and management and all of that should think about investing a little more resources into a more ongoing examination of how we can make Social Security sustainable. Because this is not unique to us. The position we are in now where it's not sustainable if we continue along the same path and don't make some shifts and whatever, it's not unique to us. The history of many Social Security systems show that when they reach a so-called age of maturity, right, that you have challenges because the whole model is one where, yeah, you collect a lot of money in the early years because you only give out a little bit in benefits. But when the pension part of it really kicks in, and there's a lot of legacy payments, because when somebody retires at 65 and they live till 95 and they're collecting a pension all the time, that's an issue. And then on top of that, you have situations where nobody wants more than a child or two. You know what I'm saying? And that is why Mr. Banks' point is so important, right? You need the number of employed persons that are required now to support a pensioner increases, but in fact, we having fewer younger people in the workforce. And those who maybe can even be part of the workforce, they're finding opportunity elsewhere because maybe income opportunities are better. We all want to live first world lifestyles and all of that. But there's a need for us to look at it because we don't have to follow the wheel that somebody else created. Tim made a very good point that we didn't spend any money to do a pre-investment study, if I might use that phrase, before we actually started Social Security. So we have to look at our situation and come up and continue to develop an Angrillian way of dealing with it that is effective. And we've got to remember, too, that even as we would talk about making Social Security sustainable, the people who study these things tell you that's only one leg of a three-leg pot. They talk about, employers having a company pension or something of that nature for the employees as well. And they talk about the responsibilities of individual people who are part of the labor force, also thinking about their planning their retirement, and therefore setting aside for their retirement. This speaks into things like savings policies and all kind of stuff. So I'm saying that it's very complicated, but that doesn't mean that we can't come up with sensible solutions that at the end of the day, we do answer the challenge of making it sustainable. And I just want to encourage the board to continue in the trend that was started. And I must say that Tim in particular, as director, was very influential in the institution of the lecture series, this lecture and then one, I think, in around Anguilla Daytime as well. But that's not enough. We need to, even if it's some kind of semi-voluntary group of people who can come together and zero in their attention on these things, do the research, read stuff, sit down and discuss how can we really make this thing sustainable. Yes, you need consultants, but at the end of the day, the knowledge that we have, which a consultant won't have, is our closeness to the situation, the basic environment and context in which all of this has to happen, which Mr. Banks emphasized. Because we have to teach the consultant who may have the technical skills, to plug into a model and all those kind of things, come back with something. the local wisdom, the local understanding that also is so important in coming up with the right kinds of solutions. So finally, I'll just say, great to look from whence we came. Now we got to look forward. We've got to focus on looking forward. And that is urgent. You know, you don't wait until you're in another major crisis stage of the situation. We take action early so that we can keep pushing back the year when, you know, we have challenges and come up with solutions to the situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Foy. I recall that we used to have a biennial conference that was sponsored by NB or Social Security or both. Both, right? Yeah. And that is something that we would have lost, and that would be a perfect forum on which to discuss some of these issues. Tim, you mentioned, I just recall, you mentioned something about the insufficiency of assets. I was not making the point that Social Security did not repay. Making the point that in the final analysis, if the system fails, the consolidated fund is supposed to ensure that the contributors, the benefits of the contributors are secured. And when I say soon as practicable, there's no timetable. It didn't say soon as possible or quickly. It says soon as practicable. So that involves a lot of other issues. So it is not a criticism about the act. It is just to indicate that Social Security and the government of Angola are partners. There are two parts of that delivery system, and they got to work together. And when we talk about political intervention is important. The Social Security, the person who is really responsible for the Social Security to oversee the Social Security is the minister. Of course, if he's a wise minister, he will listen to smart directors like yourself. But at the end of the day, it is ultimately the minister. As a consequence, you have to build a good relationship between government and Social Security and understand what damages could occur if one or the other does not show cooperation in trying to create an environment for the betterment of its contributors.
Last evening, I was listening to an article, I think it was Bonnie, the Congressman Bonnie Sanders, Stephen, whatever his name is. And he was talking about the effect, mainly in the U.S., about the artificial intelligence and robots and stuff on the workforce, how companies like Amazon are laying off people in the 20,000s. Tesla, going to be building cars completely by robots. And though Angola's workforce dynamic is totally different to that, if we're talking about the future and thinking, we have to think seriously about the effect that artificial intelligence and robots and that kind of stuff is going to have on the workforce as this kind of thing really invades the Caribbean and invades our industries. So while this may be a little way off in terms of Angola and the Caribbean, and those commercialized countries like US and China and so on, we see what effect this is having on the workforce and which is going to be the contributors to the system. So as we are thinking and developing our think tank and thinking ahead, the point is to increase our contributors, but facing the challenge that our contributors are going to be affected by this AI and modernization of the workforce. So just to let you know that, yes, we need to increase
our contributor base down the years, 5, 10 years from now, we don't know if we are going to be in the same boat as the more industrialized countries like the US and so on in terms of the effect that AI and robots and stuff will have on the economies.
Of course, robots don't make social security contributions. So that's a very important aspect of the whole thing. We have to look carefully at how AI will affect the sustainability of the fund in so many different ways. At some point, somebody's going to come up with an idea that could ensure that we can go forward in a sustainable manner. But for now, as Mr. Foy said, and I mentioned it's not a death sentence to say that the fund is not sustainable. What we have to do, and as Mr. Dr. Hodge pointed out, it happens in every social security system. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but certainly we have to understand the circumstances of Angola, the unique circumstances of Angola, and how we can operate within those. That's all we have to work with to make things happen.
I just want to comment quickly on what Pastor Hart said in relation to robots and AI and all of that. I recall that the Social Security Board was the first public sector entity to begin using computers. Am I right, Tim? The first public sector entity to begin using the desktop computers. And in fact, Mr. Webster ordered that we stop using them because they're going to throw people out of jobs. How many people were thrown out of jobs? What has been the benefit of going to microcomputers, desktop, laptops, the whole LAN systems, networking, and all of that? So, and it's not to downplay the potential negative impacts of shift in technology, because that's what it is. Because ultimately, robot and AI are just tools. And it's a technology. Remember, fire, right, is a resource that can kill you, but also that's why we can sit in these chairs. That is why we have computers. So tools, physical tools, are elements that man harnesses. They got their good part and have their bad part, and it's about who uses them and who has control and direction of them. And so we just have to include into our consideration of these issues the whole question of what is our stance in relation to AI and robots. I'm sure there are the young Angolans right now who are using AI, and I'm not using it, but I'm not a big Facebook person. But to the extent that I check something on Facebook, I can see where this is an AI production, right? And so on. So all I'm saying is, I don't want to say halo the threat, but to think about it, let's study it, and all that should be part of the subject matter of what we do. How does that affect not just Social Security potential in terms of maybe people thrown out of work and therefore the contributor base is eroded, but across the society, the economy, household, and all of those kinds of things, right? So I just wanted to say that.
If I may, sorry, I don't want to hog the mic, but I just want to say this. We've talked a lot about sustainability and what is sustainable, whether it is sustainable or not. Again, if we want to go talk about the journey, Mr. Banks, I recall, and Mr. Foy recall, any other public servants who was there, before Social Security got going, I think it was about August of that year, we had an actuary visit Anguilla from St. Kitts. And he told us about the model of Social Security that we'd be following, even before we got going. And the model said that the equilibrium point, the point at which contributions, income equals outflow, would be 25 years. What's that figure up there? 45. The Anguilla, we've had a lot of people making a lot of statements about system broke and this and all kinds of stuff. 45 years, right? The model that we are following said 25 years, your income will equal your outflows, and at that point, if you do not make the adjustments, and the adjustments have been suggested, have been recommended, and some are being implemented. So this is the system that we are using, this is the model that we're using, and the model calls for constant adjustment so that you push the equilibrium point further and further into the future. When we were setting up Social Security system, Mr. Banks will recall, Mr. Floyd will recall, there was all kinds of death sentences for the American Social Security system. You recall? Yeah. Back in the 1980s, we are 45 years hence, and there was still an American Social Security system. So I just want to say this, and also to say that when you listen to the maths, 1.7 and 5.4, that's about $7.2 million paid out of the Social Security system, unfunded. No contributions were ever been received for an unemployment benefit under the Social Security system. But it paid this, okay? So the system itself has had to do things to help Anguilla, and when the time comes, the system must be upgraded, whatever, refunded, whatever, but we are not to simply say, look at the potential bad news, because it is in our hands. You're absolutely right. It is in the minister's hands, in the government's hands, it's in the board's hands to make sure that these changes which are recommended are brought. No politician likes to say to people, pay more taxes, or pay higher contributions, or reduce your benefit levels or whatever. But if these are the things that need to be said, then they need to be said, and if they need to be done, they need to be done. And then we will not have any issue. And Mr. Banks is absolutely right. The contribution base, another way of fixing this issue is to improve the contribution base. Improve the contribution base, you got no problems. Why does the British Virgin Islands have no real issues with Social Security as of now? Because 50% of the population, I'm not saying that we need to go there, but that's what the reality of their economy is. All of the expat workers, the external workers who work in the British Virgin Islands financial services sector, etc., they pay contributions to the system, and most of them will not benefit a lot because they leave and they go back to their homes. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't want us to get caught up in being defensive, Tim, or boasting on the past, because we need to be focusing on the future. And those challenges that we face, we can almost forget about our successes and focus on making sure that the fund is sustainable going forward. You got to remember that if we have lost population, a number of those persons would have gone to other parts of the world. So they're not here working to pay contributions, but a lot of them are eligible for contributions for benefits when they get 65. But they're not putting in any, making any contributions to the fund, so they're not contributing to the security of the fund, the sustainability of the fund. But they are entitled to contributions, to benefits going down the road. So that's an element of contributors that we would have lost, and that is a factor which you have to take into account going forward. And how are we going to make this fund sustainable? And we got to focus our attention on that. And it's not doom and gloom. It's not a death sentence. But we have to have that discussion, an objective discussion of how we're going to move this forward. it's a perpetual system. The word perpetual is important. It has to continue until whatever happens, whether we have a nuclear war or whatever, it has to continue. So I thank you all very much. I see the moderator is trying to get my attention. I wouldn't have minded if she tried to get my attention earlier, because I'm not here to get any work. I'm just here to make a presentation and go back to my retirement.
Okay, thank you all for the insightful discussion. We will now have a member of staff, Mr. Shenda Brooks, who will do a presentation.
Good night. On behalf of the Anguilla Social Security Board, management, and staff, we would like to say thank you to Mr. Banks for tonight's informative lecture highlighting the journey, the dynamic journey of Social Security Anguilla style. And we'd like to present to you tonight a token of our appreciation.
Thank you, cousin.
Thank you very much, Ashanda. We will now have the vote of thanks by Denise, followed by refreshments on the outside.
Good evening, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends. As we mark the 45th anniversary of the Anguilla Social Security System, I am honored to offer the vote of thanks. First, we extend our deep gratitude to the Honorable Victor Banks for this presentation, A Dynamic Journey, Social Security Anguilla Style. The presentation spoke to Social Security's role in Anguilla's resilience. Mr. Banks, I want to say thank you for taking us on that explorative journey into our system, the Anguilla Social Security System. Your comments, the lecture, has given all of us actionable knowledge and a deeper perspective on a system that pretty much is the foundation of the Anguilla economy and Anguillians' well-being. Your insights into the evolution of the system, past, present, and future, is of course from your legacy of, it is an incredible legacy of over 2 decades of commitment to ensuring this system prospers and survives. This year, 2025-2026, we are celebrating not only our legislation, we are celebrating 4.5 decades of commitment, stability, and care for Anguilla and all our stakeholders. I would like to reiterate the thanks mentioned by the Honorable Victor Banks to our founding father, Mr. James Warner Webster, for his foresight in the starting of the system. I would like to say thank you to the Social Security Board, management and staff, past, present, and future, who have tirelessly administered the system, ensuring all Anguillians receive their due from the investment they put into the system. The Social Security system is now a pillar of national development, providing essential protection for numerous benefits. Again, I would like to close. I think this cannot be reinstated enough based on Mr. Banks' legacy and his commitment and the time he has put into this system. Thank you, Mr. Banks, for your commitment to the Anguilla Social Security. We remember Mr. James Warner Webster's powerful words that without Social Security, there can be no true security for our people. With that said, I'd like everybody to stand and give a final round of applause to the Honorable Mr. Victor Banks. Yes. Yes.
That's why we have Social Security. Once you make your contribution, you're guaranteed a pension in the long run before your time is done. But even along the journey, it may be necessary to pay you some benefit, so long as you deserve it. Disability and maternity, sickness benefit,